I noticed also that America actually set up a specific crew to search for oligarchs' yachts, which Donald Trump has just closed. Or I think in the big, beautiful bill, they're actually closing the group of people that are searching for those.
Yeah, it was even earlier than that. It was one of the first things he did, actually, after coming into office, very quietly. It was just 2 little lines in a bill, buried, but it dissolved what was known as the task force klepto-capture.
That's right, klepto-capture. What a great title.
I think Trump was offended by it on multiple levels. Look, Trump is basically eliminating the category of white-collar crime as an idea. He finds that offensive. I think having been through it himself, it brings a lot up for him. And so you see him pardoning people who have been convicted or pleaded guilty to white-collar crimes over and over again. And this is, in a way, the geopolitical dimension of that. He's saying to Russian oligarchs who have had their boats seized, you're free to go. Sorry for the misunderstanding, off you go. And in a way, I think he's also saying that he doesn't believe that there is such a thing as an expression of illegitimate acquisition of wealth. He's rejecting the premise of oligarchy.
It's a very good description of him, actually, and it makes me think that I have never actually seen an image of Donald Trump on a boat. Well, because he doesn't famously have a super yacht.
Well, actually, interesting, he doesn't. You're absolutely right. But he did at one point. And he bought a yacht that belonged to somebody. You'll remember this name. It belonged to Adnan Khashoggi.
Oh,
and Adnan
yes,
Khashoggi,
the arms dealer.
Saudi arms dealer.
Right.
What happened was Khashoggi, who was a kind of, in a way, was sort of the Elon Musk of his time, right? He was a giant figure on the world stage, and but he eventually got into some trouble over taxes and things like that. He had to sell off his yacht. Trump bought it at a cheap price, as he likes to do, and he rebranded it the Trump Princess. And the only problem was, he hates boats, and he admitted as much. He said, I can't get off this yacht fast enough, but he liked showing it off to people.
Of course, because it's a status symbol for
That's
him.
all it is for him. That's all it is.
Symbol.
Eventually, it was seized by his creditors when he had a bankruptcy.
Of course it was. Of course it was. And I thought you were going to say it belonged to Jeffrey Epstein, actually, which was what happened to him during the campaign when he ended up leasing a plane, and it was Epstein's plane, and he thought he was going to die on Epstein's plane because it was a very turbulent journey. Anyway, it was not Epstein's. It was Khashoggi, arms dealer, pedophile, great guys.
And I think there is a hugely important generational divide that you've hit on, which is that the Warren Buffetts and the Bill Gateses, which were an earlier generation than Musk,
and who famously
Bezos.
signed up to, or Warren Buffett created the Giving Pledge and Bill Gates, or was it the other way around? Bill Gates devised, I can't remember, but they
were
both
the
signed
icons
up
of
to it.
Certainly.
Right.
Yeah. And that was really important, that they were going to give away most of their wealth. And I think the reason why it's worth, this is the case for paying attention to billionaires, is that they dominate our kind of moral horizons, whether we want them to or not.
Right.
It matters who is ruling these social hierarchies, because as we know, if you spend any time on Wall Street or Silicon Valley, they are all looking up to see who and what the biggest dog is doing.
Right.
And if that person is living a life of almost cartoonish, flamboyant self-indulgence, well, that trickles down, to borrow an old expression, and that becomes a way of living. And I think that that sort of Bezos style, we sometimes talk about the paranoid style in American politics, but there's a Bezos style and a Trump style, which is that you live in flamboyant brazenness.
You live loud.
You live loud.
And also it used to be, and I'm not saying that the way it used to be is the right way, but
Right.
but what's interesting is examining the change. It used to be that people would make an enormous amount of money and then go into public service or then go into politics. And that seems to, obviously you have Elon who's just done that, but Elon is an example. It's a kind of warning example of not to do this, because look what's happened to him. And maybe that's because Donald Trump is president, and, Donald Trump has a very specific idiosyncratic way of running the government. But hard to think that any very successful people would want to follow Elon's passage into government.
I think this is a really important moment, because Elon, by crossing a boundary that nobody else had ever crossed before, Andrew Carnegie, when he was the richest man in the world, never had an office in the White House complex and a department of government at his command. Musk, however, did what is a tempting problem when you get to be that rich or you get to be that successful in one domain is you assume that your specific acumen is actually a form of general intelligence that you can apply broadly. He came to Washington and he tripped a wire in the public consciousness. I think there was a way in which his in a sense, undisguised, unabashed pleasure at using his money to buy power and then using his power to make money offended this subtle distinction in the American mind in which we are always teetering on the edge of worshiping money and being appalled by it. And we live in that ambivalence. That is the American nature.
Well, and I think, isn't there a sense of fairness in America that we applaud people who make a lot of money, we appreciate it, but it doesn't make us feel good when they then buy political power with it. That's not the deal.
Absolutely
somehow,
true. Yeah.
Right? They can have many houses, they can have a big yacht, but it's not supposed to mean that you get incredible political benefits.
Yeah, that's right. Americans actually we're quite tolerant in comparative terms with other countries of economic inequality. We're not especially keen on political inequality. It bothers Americans. Now, I think you have to point out, so then why do we have such profound political inequality? Because we do. And I think that's the gap between where the consciousness is and where the dysfunction of our politics fails to pick up on the public will. That's where I see things going. What we're seeing at the moment, and it's really interesting, the mood over the last few months, essentially we'll call it the backlash to Musk period, was a sign of something of a kind of spoilage in the public tolerance for this moment of super power, where people said, that clangs against my concept of what it means to be really rich in this country. And I went to these Bernie Sanders rallies where I met people, to my kind of surprise, who had never been to a Sanders rally and were actually quite sympathetic to the Republican identity. Traditionally, they thought of themselves as I'm a wealth creator, I'm a business person, but they were feeling as if the word that came up over and over was I'm afraid. I'm afraid, actually. I don't know.
And they're afraid of Trumpism, or they're afraid of what?
Where the country is going if you have the world's richest man using a few keystrokes to shut down jobs and USAID. I mean, Bill Gates,
Medicare, right?
Yeah, and ultimately it's about, Social Security and Medicare are cornerstones of how people imagine the American bargain, what you put in and what you get out. And he doesn't participate in that. And so he doesn't understand it. So when Musk called it a Ponzi scheme, it was a reveal of how secluded he's become from the actual American experience.
One of the interesting things about having a lot of money and having been very successful in business is there is frequently a feeling that you can do no wrong. And yet one is constantly aware, and politics is a good arena for this, of you can spend buckets of money and it still won't get you the thing that actually, weirdly, Donald Trump has managed to get, which is why they're suddenly all having to pay homage to Donald Trump for pulling something off that some of them couldn't achieve, and that they wouldn't dare to enter that arena.
Yeah.
I mean, almost every Silicon Valley entrepreneur that I've come across harbors presidential ambitions. And some of them are never going to get there because socially they just can't even connect with an audience in certainly the way that Donald Trump can. But clearly for people like that who are ambitious, who've had success, it's still something that they want to reach out for. It's the brass ring.
It is. And I think that the Trump era has made many of them say, well, hold on a second. I've known Donald Trump for 25 years. He was a buffoonish piece of the New York media furniture, and now he's the president of the United States. Well, surely if he can do it, then I would be able to do a much better job. I mean, that has been a running commentary for much of the last decade. And yet I do think it underappreciates something, which is that, as you said, quite rightly, I think a lot of these folks don't have quite the same. He has let's call it what it is. He has a particularly idiosyncratic social, political genius. I think a lot of us find it to be a terrible cancer upon the land, but it is a kind of genius. And his ability to take his own extraordinary advantages, being born the scion of a real estate fortune and somehow positioning himself as the critic of the elite, who is also the aspirational figure for hardworking people around the country, is fascinating to me. And I spent a lot of time thinking about this. Just a throwaway comment somebody made to me at one point was that in a way, the reason why they stick with him, the reason why, even though he doesn't fulfill the promises to revive coal mines in West Virginia or to bring back the things that he says he would, is that they see in him some way in which he expects more out of them. That he says to them, if things go right, you could be just like me. And on some level, I think people like that. I've heard it from them. I mean, I think they're appalled by abuses of power, by the disproportionate ways in which the powerful are galloping ahead. But I think in him, his crudeness is also his credibility.
This podcast was produced by Devon Rogerino and Anna von Ursen, and it was edited by Devon too.